"This is our older daughter, Claire," my mother said, resting 2 fingers lightly against my arm. "She just does housekeeping." The couple standing in front of us smiled politely, the way people do when they aren't sure whether they're supposed to ask a follow-up question. I felt the correction rise automatically. I started in housekeeping. Now I train hotel teams across New England. But I swallowed it. This was Megan's wedding, and 3 hours earlier I'd promised myself I wouldn't let an argument with my parents become one of her wedding memories. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 34, and I've worked in hospitality since I was 19. I spent 6 years cleaning guest rooms before becoming a supervisor, then moved into training and operations. These days, independent hotels bring me in when their housekeeping departments are struggling with turnover, inconsistent procedures, or teams that have stopped trusting management. I love the work. My parents have never quite understood why. Or maybe that wasn't entirely true. They understood enough. They just preferred the shorter version. Before I go further, tell me, how old are you? Where are you watching from? And has your own family ever described you in a way that made you feel smaller than you really were? Outside the reception hall, October rain streaked the tall windows. Inside, everything glowed amber and gold. Megan looked beautiful in her wedding dress, laughing beside Ethan while photographers moved around them. I wanted this day to stay hers. That mattered because Megan wasn't the problem. She had spent months planning the wedding, and I knew how nervous she was about our family's meeting. Ethan's relatives included doctors, business owners, professors, the kinds of people who made Mom suddenly mention Megan's graduate degree twice in one conversation. "Megan's doing wonderfully in healthcare administration," Mom told another guest a few minutes later. "She's always been ambitious." Then the woman glanced toward me. "And Claire?" Mom smiled. "Hotels. Housekeeping." Dad, Robert, heard her and gave me the familiar look that meant, "Don't start." So I didn't. That was my part in our family system. Mom simplified. Dad translated her intention into something harmless. I decided correcting either of them wasn't worth the fight. It kept dinners peaceful. It kept holidays moving. It also meant people who had known me for years still occasionally asked whether I was cleaning at that hotel downtown. I picked up my water and moved toward the edge of cocktail hour. I wasn't going to spend Megan's wedding defending my resume. I could choose that much. Across the room, however, a woman in a navy dress had stopped talking to Ethan's aunt. She was looking directly at me. Not casually. Carefully. She glanced toward my parents, then back at me, as though trying to place a face she hadn't expected to see here. A moment later, I saw a recognition settle into her expression. She started walking toward me. The woman in the navy dress was intercepted before she reached me. Ethan's aunt touched her elbow and pulled her toward the bar, saying something that made them both laugh. The woman looked back once, almost apologetically, and I felt strangely relieved. Whatever she thought she recognized could wait. "Claire." Megan appeared beside me, gathering the front of her dress so nobody stepped on it. "Mom said you seemed upset." Mom has impressive timing. Megan gave me a look. "Please." I immediately regretted the edge in my voice. She had been awake since 5 that morning, and beneath the makeup and perfect curls, I could see the exhaustion around her eyes. "I'm fine," I said. "She introduced me badly. That's all." Megan glanced toward our parents. "You know how Mom talks about jobs. She talks about your job pretty accurately." Megan sighed. "That's different." "Why?" She opened her mouth, then looked across the room as Ethan waved for her. "Can we not do this today?" There was no cruelty in her voice. That almost made it harder. "Yes," I said. "Go enjoy your wedding." She squeezed my hand and left. 10 minutes later, Dad found me rearranging place cards that didn't need rearranging. "Your mother wasn't insulting you." "I didn't say she was." "Your face did." Dad picked up one of the cards, inspected it, then put it exactly where it had been. "She just doesn't understand all those job titles." I looked at him. Housekeeping operations trainer isn't exactly cardiothoracic surgeon. See? That tone. That was how these conversations usually ended. Mom said something inaccurate. I corrected it. Dad stopped discussing the facts and started discussing my reaction. Years earlier, at Thanksgiving, my uncle had asked whether I was still cleaning rooms at the Harbor House. I'd explained that I was supervising 3 floors by then. Mom had laughed and said, "She likes to make it sound fancy." Everyone moved on to football before I could decide whether correcting her again would make me look ridiculous. Later, when I became a regional trainer, Dad congratulated me privately. At Christmas, he introduced me to a neighbor by saying, "Claire still works on the hotel housekeeping side." Technically true, conveniently incomplete. The frustrating part was that I wasn't ashamed of cleaning rooms. I remembered pushing a loaded cart down narrow hallways, stripping beds with aching shoulders, and learning exactly how much invisible labor stood between a guest checking out at 11 and another walking into a spotless room at 3. Those years were why I was good at training now. I knew what impossible workloads looked like because I had carried them. What hurt was watching my family take work I respected and use it as shorthand for why I required less explanation than Megan. Across the reception room, Mom was telling someone about Megan's promotion last spring. She knew the department Megan ran, the size of her team, even the certification she had recently completed. When Mom caught me watching, she smiled as though nothing had happened. I made a decision then. I would keep my promise not to create a scene at Megan's wedding. But if someone asked me directly what I did, I wasn't going to lie for my parents either. The distinction felt small enough to live with. Dinner was announced, and everyone began moving toward the ballroom. As I reached my table, I saw the woman in the navy dress again. This time no one stopped her. She came straight toward me, studying my face with growing certainty. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Claire Bennett?" "Yes," I said. "I'm Claire." The woman's face brightened. "Janice Holloway. My daughter, Rebecca, worked at the Seabrook in last year." The name clicked immediately. Rebecca had been a room attendant when I arrived at Seabrook during one of the roughest stretches I'd seen in years. Half the housekeeping staff had quit within 2 months, supervisors were covering rooms themselves, and everyone was exhausted. "Rebecca," I said. "She moved into a supervisor position before I left." "She did." Janice smiled. "She still talks about you." I wasn't sure what to say to that. "I hope mostly good things." "She said you were the first trainer who actually asked the housekeepers what was going wrong before telling them how to fix it." Janice lowered her voice slightly. "She almost quit before you came. That meant more to me than any impressive job title could have." "Rebecca did the hard part," I said. "She stayed and helped rebuild the team." "Are you still traveling around New England doing training?" "I am. Mostly independent properties now. It's all housekeeping related." Mom's voice appeared beside us before I realized she had walked over. Janice looked at her, then at me. "Well, yes," I said carefully. "Housekeeping operations and training." Mom smiled. "Claire has always been very dedicated." The sentence sounded supportive, but something had shifted. Janice had heard both versions now. She didn't challenge Mom. She simply said, "Rebecca was lucky to have her." "That's kind of you," Mom replied. Dinner seating was starting, so Janice touched my arm. "I'd love to introduce you later to a friend of ours. He and his wife run a small inn in Rockport. They've been having terrible staff turnover." "Sure," I said, "if there's time." After she left, Mom remained beside me. "You don't need to turn this into networking." I didn't. "I know. I'm just saying." She recognized me, Mom. "And that's nice." Mom adjusted the bracelet on her wrist. "But tonight is about Megan." There it was again, the assumption that being accurately known somehow took attention away from my sister. I looked across the ballroom. Megan and Ethan were laughing while the photographer tried to organize their wedding party. Megan wasn't watching us. She wasn't being overshadowed. She was getting married. "I'm not handing out business cards," I said. "If somebody asks what I do, I'm going to answer them." Mom's expression tightened for half a second. "Nobody said you couldn't." "Good." I walked toward my table before the conversation could become the very argument I had promised to avoid. But something bothered me through dinner. It wasn't that Janice had recognized me. It wasn't even that Mom had interrupted. It was how quickly she had done it, as though she already knew exactly which part of my answer she wanted to contain. Later, while Megan and Ethan moved from table to table greeting guests, Janice caught my eye and pointed toward a gray-haired man standing beside her. She raised her eyebrows in a silent question. "Now?" I glanced toward Megan, then toward Mom. For years, that second glance would have made the decision for me. This time, I nodded to Janice and stood. Janice introduced me to the gray-haired man as Tom Whitaker, who owned a 30-room inn in Rockport with his wife. He shook my hand and got straight to the point. "Janice says you work with housekeeping teams." "I do. We can hire people. We just can't keep them." That was a problem I knew well. I asked how many rooms each attendant handled, whether supervisors were cleaning rooms during busy weekends, and how schedules were posted. Within a minute, Tom stopped making small talk and started answering seriously. That's exactly what my wife keeps telling me. He said when I mentioned that turnovers sometimes looked like a hiring problem when it was really a workload problem. Could I email you next week? Of course. I gave him my work email from memory. No business card. No sales pitch. No attempt to turn Megan's reception into a conference. We talked for maybe 5 minutes. When I stepped away, Dad was waiting near the hallway leading to the restrooms. Your mother wants a word. That sounds promising. Claire. His tone warned me before I even saw her. Mom stood near a tall window overlooking the rain-dark lawn, holding her champagne glass with both hands. What are you doing? She asked. Quietly. Talking to someone Janice introduced me to. About work. He asked about work. You could have said you'd talk another time. I stared at her. Why would I need to? Because this is a wedding. I noticed. Dad rubbed his forehead. Nobody's saying you did anything terrible. Then what are we doing out here? Mom lowered her voice further. Could you just not turn tonight into a whole career conversation? For a moment, I genuinely didn't know how to answer. Mom, someone recognized me. Then she introduced me to someone who asked me questions. I answered them. And now people are going to think we didn't explain what you do correctly. The sentence came out so quickly that Mom seemed to hear it at the same time I did. Dad stepped in. That's not what she means. What does she mean? She means there's no reason to make this complicated. My job isn't complicated. Exactly, Mom said. So why does every conversation about it become this explanation? I felt something inside me tighten. Because you tell people I'm a housekeeper. You work in housekeeping. I work with housekeeping departments. Claire. Dad's voice sharpened. Your mother is not ashamed of you. I didn't say she was. You're acting like she deliberately insulted you. Before I could answer, Megan appeared at the end of the hallway. She had changed out of her veil, and a few strands of hair had come loose around her face. What happened? Nothing, Dad said immediately. Mom looked toward the ballroom. We're trying to keep tonight focused where it belongs. Megan looked at me. Claire, I could have told her exactly what had happened. I could have repeated Mom's sentence about people realizing they hadn't explained my work correctly. Instead, I remembered Megan that morning, sitting in the bridal suite with shaking hands while I fastened her grandmother's bracelet around her wrist. She had asked for one thing from me. Help her get through the day without family drama. Janice introduced me to someone, I said. We talked about work for a few minutes. Megan closed her eyes briefly. Can we please not do this tonight? The words hurt more coming from her. Do what? Whatever this is. I answered a question. I know. She looked exhausted rather than angry. I'm not saying you did something wrong. I'm asking everyone to stop. Dad nodded as though that settled it. Mom reached for Megan's hand. I suddenly understood that everyone did not have equal work to do in order for the conflict to stop. Mom could keep describing me however she wanted. Dad could keep explaining why she meant no harm. My job was to make sure my reaction remained small enough that nobody else had to deal with it. Still, I stepped back. Okay, go back to your reception. Megan searched my face. Are you mad at me? I don't want to talk about it right now. For once, I didn't tell her everything was fine. I walked through a side door onto the covered terrace. The October air was cold enough that I immediately folded my arms over my emerald dress. Rain tapped against the stone beyond the awning. Behind the glass, I could see my family return to the reception as though the interruption had been handled. A minute later, the door opened behind me. I expected Dad. It was Megan. She had followed me outside. Claire, she said quietly, there's something I probably should have told you before today. For a few seconds, Megan just stood there with one hand holding the terrace door closed behind her. Without the music, speeches, and clinking glasses, I could hear the rain hitting the stone beyond the awning. What should you have told me? I asked. Megan looked through the glass toward our parents before answering. Mom talked to me about this before the wedding. About what? About your work. I stared at her. My work was a wedding planning topic. Not like that. Then like what? Megan folded her arms against the cold. When we were doing the seating chart, Mom started talking about Ethan's relatives. She was nervous. His aunt's a physician, his cousin teaches at Tufts, his parents know all these people from their neighborhood and the club. And she said if people asked what you did, we should keep it simple. Something in me went still. Define simple. Megan hesitated. Housekeeping. I looked away toward the rain. Until that moment, I had been treating Mom's comments as a habit, hurtful, dismissive, but almost automatic. She told you to say that. She said you tend to give people the whole explanation, And then it sounds like we're trying too hard to make your job seem important. I laughed once, but there was nothing funny in it. So she does understand the explanation. Claire, that's what I've been trying to figure out. Dad keeps saying she doesn't understand my title. Apparently she understands it well enough to decide which parts nobody should hear. Megan stepped closer. I should have told you. Why didn't you? Her answer took longer. Because I wanted one day where Mom wasn't anxious about how our family came across. There it was. Not malice. Not jealousy. Something more ordinary and, somehow, more painful. Convenience. And you thought I could help with that by being smaller. Megan flinched. I didn't think of it that way. I know. I wasn't embarrassed by you. Then why did you ask me to keep quiet? Because I knew if you corrected her, she'd get defensive. Dad would jump in. Then everybody would be upset, and I didn't want that happening today. I looked through the glass. Mom was speaking with Ethan's mother. Dad stood beside her, smiling. From out here, they looked completely relaxed. I suddenly saw the arrangement with embarrassing clarity. Mom simplified me. Dad explained that she meant well. Megan asked me not to react because reacting created tension, and I had spent years doing exactly what everyone needed from me. I had mistaken my silence for maturity. You know what the weird part is? I said, I've never been ashamed that I cleaned rooms. Megan nodded. I know. I was good at it. I still train people who do it. The problem isn't the word housekeeper. I turned toward her. The problem is that Mom uses one true piece of my life to erase everything else, and all of us pretend correcting her would be rude. Megan's eyes dropped. That's fair. No, it isn't. She looked up, startled. I mean the situation. It isn't fair. I took a breath. But I'm not going back inside to punish anybody. I'm not making a speech. I'm not telling Ethan's family what Mom said out here. Megan's shoulders relaxed slightly. Okay, but if someone asks what I do, I'm answering accurately. The relief disappeared from her face. Claire, could you maybe just wait until after tonight? That question clarified the last thing I needed to understand. That's exactly what you're asking me to keep doing. It's a few more hours. Today it's a few hours. At Thanksgiving it'll be because Uncle David is there. At Christmas it'll be because Mom doesn't want an argument. There's always a reason. Megan was quiet. I don't want to hurt you, I said. And I'm not going to hijack your wedding. But keeping your wedding peaceful cannot require me to agree with something that isn't true. Megan stared through the glass for a long moment. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I opened the terrace door. Warm air and music spilled outside. Before stepping in, I looked at her. I've spent years trying to get Mom and Dad to describe me differently. I'm done with that. Megan frowned. What does that mean? It means they can say whatever they want. I stepped back into the reception. And so can I. When I walked back into the ballroom, nothing looked different. The band had started something upbeat. Megan's college friends were crowding the dance floor, and Dad was laughing with Ethan's uncle near the bar. Mom glanced at me from across the room. I could tell she was checking whether the conversation outside had worked. I didn't glare at her. I didn't avoid her either. I went back to my table and finished the coffee I had left cooling beside my plate. For the next 20 minutes, nobody asked me about work. That gave me enough time to wonder whether my declaration on the terrace had been easier to make because I hadn't actually had to live by it yet. Then a woman seated beside Ethan's grandmother leaned toward me. I think I misunderstood your mother earlier, she said. Do you clean hotels? Or do you manage them? There it was. A simple question. Mom was 3 seats away. I could feel her attention shift before I even looked at her. The old answer would have been something vague. I work in housekeeping. Technically true. Conversation over. Everyone comfortable. Instead I said, I started out cleaning rooms. Now I train housekeeping teams and work with independent hotels on their operations. The woman nodded. So you're a consultant? Sometimes they use that word. Trainer is usually closer to what I actually do. Do you like it? Very much. She smiled. That's nice. And then she turned back to her dessert. That was it. No one gasped. Nobody suddenly treated me like the most important person at the table. The ceiling did not collapse because I had described my own job accurately. Somehow, that ordinary reaction made the moment more important. I had spent years acting as though correcting my parents would trigger some enormous family disaster. Most people, it turned out, could hear a clarification and simply continue eating cake. Mom waited until the woman left for the dance floor. Was that necessary? She asked softly. She asked me a question. You knew what she meant. Yes. That's why I answered it. Dad looked between us. Let's not start again. I put down my fork. I'm not starting anything. Then why keep correcting people? Mom asked. Because they're asking about me. Nobody is trying to misrepresent you. A few hours earlier, I would have argued with that sentence. I would have listed examples and tried to make Mom admit what she was doing. I didn't anymore. Okay, I said. Mom blinked. Okay. You don't think you're misrepresenting me. I do. We're probably not settling that tonight. Dad seemed relieved. Good. But I'm still going to answer for myself. His relief vanished. Mom stared at me. So you're going to spend the rest of your sister's wedding making corrections? No. I'm going to spend the rest of Megan's wedding being her sister. If someone asks what I do, I'll tell them. That's splitting hairs. Maybe. I stood because the band had shifted into a song Megan and I used to scream along to in her first car. But they're my hairs to split. Dad almost smiled despite himself. Mom did not. On the dance floor, Megan saw me approaching. For a second, she looked uncertain. I held out my hand. You planning to make me dance alone at your own wedding? Her expression softened. Absolutely. She took my hand anyway. We danced badly with 3 of her friends until Ethan joined us. I didn't mention the terrace conversation. Neither did Megan. That mattered. My decision wasn't going to require the entire evening to revolve around it. Later, when I went to get water, Dad followed me to the bar. You know your mother grew up thinking job titles were a measure of whether you'd made something of yourself, he said. Grandpa was like that. I know. When you stayed in housekeeping, she worried people would judge you. So she judges me first? That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? Dad looked tired. That she thinks simplifying it protects you. That explanation surprised me, not because it excused anything, but because I believed he believed it. Dad, if she thinks my work needs protecting from other people's judgment, then she's already decided there's something embarrassing about it. He looked down at his drink. She's proud of you. Then she can learn to be proud of the actual version. I took my water and started to leave. Dad stopped me with one question. And if she doesn't? I thought about it. For years, that possibility would have frightened me enough to retreat. Now the answer felt almost plain. Then she doesn't. Dad studied my face. That easy. No, I shook my head. Just that simple. When I returned to my table, Megan was speaking with an older relative I barely knew. As I approached, the woman smiled at me. Megan was just telling me you travel all over training hotel staff. Megan's eyes met mine. She looked uncomfortable, almost as though she wasn't sure whether she had done the right thing. Mostly around New England, I said. I'm home more than it sounds. The woman laughed and asked where I was headed next. I answered. Mom had heard the exchange from across the table. So had Dad. Nobody corrected Megan. Nobody corrected me. It was a tiny change, fragile enough that I didn't trust it yet. But for the first time that evening, my family had heard someone describe my life accurately without me first asking permission. Near the end of the reception, I was helping Megan gather cards from one of the gift tables when Ethan's mother, Carol, came over to thank my parents for the evening. You two must be proud, she said. Both your daughters seem so accomplished. Mom smiled immediately. Oh, Megan has worked incredibly hard. She's really built something for herself. Carol glanced toward me. And Claire clearly knows her industry. Tom hasn't stopped talking about their conversation. Mom gave a small laugh. Claire has always been good with housekeeping. I felt the old impulse to correct her, but before I spoke, Carol was called away by Ethan's father. Mom waited until she was gone. Please don't. I haven't said anything. I can see you getting ready to. Dad approached, sensing the tension. Mom lowered her voice. There's maybe an hour left. Can we just finish the night without another clarification? I looked at her. Another clarification. You know what I mean. I do. That was the problem. Mom wasn't asking me to avoid an argument anymore. She was asking me to keep protecting her version of me. I'm not going around correcting people, I said. But if someone asks me directly, I'm answering. Why does everything have to become a statement with you? Mom asked. The question hit exactly where it always had. For years, that sentence had worked because I never wanted to be the difficult daughter. The one who needed everyone to use the perfect words. The one who couldn't let things go. Dad sighed. Claire, nobody's asking you to lie. If someone asks what I do and I deliberately give them an answer I know is incomplete because Mom prefers it, what would you call that? Neither answered. I looked toward Megan. She was laughing with Ethan beside the cake table, finally looking relaxed. I could walk over there, enjoy the last hour, and let Mom have this. The cost would be familiar. I would leave angry at them, and even angrier at myself. Or I could retaliate. I could tell Carol exactly what Mom had said earlier. I could explain that my own family had planned before the wedding to keep my career simple. It would be true. It would also make Megan's wedding the setting for a fight she hadn't created alone. Neither choice felt like the person I wanted to become. Here's what I'm going to do, I said. I'm not exposing private conversations. I'm not embarrassing you. I'm not making a speech. Mom's shoulders loosened slightly. But I'm also not editing myself anymore. They tightened again. If someone asks me a question, I'll answer honestly. If they misunderstand, I'll correct the misunderstanding. What they think after that is theirs. And if that makes me look dishonest? Mom asked. I held her gaze. Then I'm not going to lie to make you look honest. Dad looked away. Mom went silent. The words scared me after I said them, because I knew I couldn't retreat from them without returning to the exact arrangement I had finally recognized. I walked back toward Megan. Behind me, the band announced the final round of dancing. Ahead of me, Janice was approaching with Tom again. This time, Mom and Dad were close enough to hear whatever I chose to say. Janice reached me first. Claire, I hope I'm not stealing you from the wedding again. You're fine. Tom stood beside her with his phone in one hand. I promise I'm not asking for free consulting, he said. I just wanted your contact information before we leave. Sure. I gave him my email again while he typed it into his phone. Then he paused. Actually, there's something I've been wondering. How did you end up doing this? Did you come into hospitality through management? I knew Mom and Dad were behind me. I could feel their presence without turning around. The easiest answer was yes. Not technically accurate, but close enough to move the conversation along. The crueler answer was available too. I could turn toward Tom and say, actually, my parents have spent the whole evening telling people I'm just a housekeeper. Then I could explain everything. Janice already knew enough to understand the contradiction. Tom would probably understand too. Mom would be embarrassed. Dad would be furious. And for a few satisfying minutes, I would finally control how everyone saw them. I didn't want that kind of control. No, I said. I started as a housekeeper when I was 19. Mom shifted behind me. I continued. I cleaned rooms for 6 years. Then I became a supervisor, and eventually I moved into training. Now I work with housekeeping teams and independent hotels on operations, workload, retention, and training. Tom nodded. That explains why you asked about room assignments before hiring. You can't fix turnover if you don't understand the job people are leaving. Exactly. He smiled. What made you stay in housekeeping that long? For years, that question would have made me defensive because I had learned to hear my mother's judgment inside other people's curiosity. But Tom didn't sound judgmental. He sounded interested. So I answered the question he had actually asked. Because the work mattered, I said. It mattered when I was cleaning rooms, and it matters now. A better title didn't suddenly make the people doing that work more valuable. Janice smiled softly. Tom said, that's probably why people listen to you. Sometimes. I laughed. Sometimes they definitely don't. He thanked me and said he would email Monday. Then he and Janice moved toward the coat check. There was no applause. Nobody nearby stopped talking. The band kept playing. Megan and Ethan were still saying goodbye to guests. And somehow that made the moment feel complete. I turned around. Mom was looking at me. You could have left it at training, she said. I could have. You made a point of saying you cleaned rooms. Because I did. Dad stepped closer. Claire, I think your mother is saying she doesn't understand why that part matters so much. I looked at both of them. Because I'm tired of having two versions of my life. The version you use because you think it makes me smaller, and the version I use because I'm trying to prove I'm not. Mom's expression changed slightly. I never said it made you smaller. Then stop using it that way. She looked down. I didn't wait for an apology. I wasn't sure one was coming, and for once I didn't need the conversation to end with her admitting I was right. A few minutes later, an older cousin stopped Megan near us and nodded toward me. So Claire's the one who cleans hotels? I opened my mouth, but Megan answered first. She started in housekeeping. She trains hotel teams now. The cousin nodded. Got it. That was all. Megan looked at me afterward, uncertain. I smiled at her. Not because she had rescued me. She hadn't. I had already said what I needed to say. But she had made her own choice about which version of me she would participate in from now on. As the reception began emptying, I helped her gather the last cards from the gift table. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for asking you to stay small so everybody else could stay comfortable. I looked at her. Thank you. Are you still mad? A little. She laughed through tired eyes. Fair. I picked up another envelope. The strange thing was that I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter. Janice recognizing me had opened the door, but recognition wasn't what changed anything. The change happened when I stopped waiting for somebody else's opinion of me to make the truth safe enough to say. By Thanksgiving, nobody in my family had become a different person. That was probably the first sign that the change was real. Mom still worried about appearances. Dad still had a habit of translating uncomfortable conversations into something less threatening. Megan still preferred peace whenever peace was available. And I still worked in hospitality. What had changed was the part one played in keeping everyone comfortable. Thanksgiving was at my parents' house, as usual. I arrived in a charcoal sweater with a pie from the bakery near my apartment and found Megan and Ethan already helping Dad open wine in the kitchen. Mom was talking to my cousin David when I walked in. Claire's been traveling constantly, she told him. She works in housekeeping. Mom stopped. It was barely a pause, but I noticed it. She looked at me, not apologetically, more like someone realizing she had reached a sentence she no longer had permission to finish for somebody else. Hospitality training, I said. I'm in Portland next week. David asked what kind of training, and I answered. Mom went back to checking the turkey. No argument followed. I didn't thank her for allowing me to speak. She didn't deserve a medal for it, and I didn't need one either. Dad's change was quieter. When a neighbor stopped by later and asked whether I was still working with hotels, Dad said, Claire can explain it better than I can. 6 words. That was all. But they replaced years of him explaining Mom's version of me. Megan changed most clearly. A few weeks after the wedding, she called because Ethan's cousin was looking for someone to speak with a group of hospitality students about frontline management. I gave her your email, Megan said. Then she paused. I told her you started in housekeeping and moved into training. Was that okay? The question surprised me. Not because she had described me correctly, but because she had finally understood that the description belonged to me. Yeah, I said. That's exactly right. My relationship with Mom remained complicated. She never gave me the sweeping apology I once imagined I needed. One afternoon in December, she admitted that she had always worried people would hear housekeeper and assume I had failed to move forward. I thought I was protecting you from being judged, she said, by deciding what people should know about me. I suppose it sounds bad when you say it that way. It felt bad living it that way. She didn't argue. That was enough for the moment. The consequence for my parents wasn't losing a daughter. I didn't cut them off. They didn't lose their home, their reputation, or their place in the family. They lost something more specific. The assumption that I would cooperate whenever they edited me for their comfort. If Mom described me inaccurately, I corrected her. If Dad tried to explain what Mom really meant, I told him I understood her perfectly well and could answer for myself. Sometimes that made dinner awkward. We survived awkward dinners. In January, I returned to Seabrook for a training session. Rebecca, the employee whose mother had recognized me at Megan's wedding, was now helping onboard new room attendants. During a break, one of them asked how I had moved from cleaning rooms into the work I did now. I told her the truth. I started at 19. I was slow at first. I learned. I became good. I supervised. I trained. I kept moving because I cared about the work, not because I was trying to escape being associated with it. Driving home that evening, I thought about Janice recognizing me across the wedding reception. At the time, it had felt like the moment everything might change. It wasn't. Janice had only created a contradiction my family could no longer hide as easily. The real change came later, when I stopped treating somebody else's recognition as permission to describe myself honestly. From the outside, family respect can look like agreement, praise, or public support. But sometimes it is something more basic, allowing another person to own the truth of their own life. Love without that respect can become strangely controlling, even when the people doing it insist they have good intentions. And boundaries do not always mean leaving. Sometimes they mean staying in the relationship while refusing one particular role you were assigned inside it. By spring, Mom occasionally stumbled over how to introduce my work. Dad had learned to let me answer. Megan no longer asked me to keep things simple. None of them suddenly admired every decision I made. They didn't have to. Fairness meant they could have their opinions without turning those opinions into my identity. The wedding had started with Mom telling strangers I was just a housekeeper. Months later, I understood why those words had hurt so much. It wasn't because being a housekeeper was beneath me. It was because the word just had been doing all the damage. I had spent years trying to convince my family to remove it. Eventually, I learned something better. I could remove it myself.